He walked into that ballroom with another woman on his arm, and every soul in the room held their breath, waiting for his wife to shatter. But Abigail Mercer did not shatter. She smiled, not a broken smile, not a desperate one. A smile so calm, so final, it stopped William Harrington cold in the middle of the most elegant room in all of Kent. And when he finally gathered the courage to ask her why, she looked him straight in the eye and spoke 7 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. If you've ever loved someone who stopped seeing you, stay with me. This story is for you. And if it touches your heart, please subscribe and follow along. Because every week, we tell the stories that the history books forgot to write about women like us. 200 guests, and not one of them was looking at the right person. That was the thing Abigail understood the moment the ballroom doors swung open, and the room shifted, that invisible, collective tilt that happens when someone important enters a space. When 200 people turn their heads without being asked and hold their breath without deciding to. William walked in, broad-shouldered, silver threading his dark hair at the temples, wearing his evening coat the way he wore everything as though the world had been arranged specifically to frame him. He had always commanded a room without effort. That had not changed. What had changed was the woman on his arm. Charlotte Whitmore was 26 years old and golden-haired and laughing before she had taken 10 steps inside the room, her laugh carrying over the music and the conversation as naturally as though she had always belonged here. She held William's arm with the easy confidence of someone who has never once questioned her right to be exactly where she is. Abigail watched them from her place near the east window. She did not reach for her glass. She did not signal to anyone with her eyes. She did not perform the careful dignity of a woman managing a public humiliation. She simply watched with the stillness of someone who has been expecting something for a long time and is not surprised to see it arrive. And then slowly, without calculation, she smiled. It moved across her face the way dawn moves, not announced, simply present. Margaret Ashford, standing 12 feet away, saw it and felt something cold move down her spine. She would try to describe it later, to her daughter, and would struggle. It was not cruel, she would say. It was not bitter. It was something she had never seen on a human face before, and hoped, privately, never to see again, because it was the smile of a woman who has just been released from something she didn't know was holding her. It was the smile of someone finally completely free. William found her eyes across 200 people. He had been carefully avoiding the east window all evening. He was a man skilled at selective attention, looking at what served him, overlooking what complicated him. He had practiced this skill for 9 years without naming it. But something pulled his gaze anyway. The way your eyes go to a candle in a dark room without your permission. And when he found her face across that crowded ballroom, he stopped breathing. She was not weeping. She was not rigid with contained fury. She was not performing the dignified suffering that 200 witnesses might reasonably have expected. She was smiling at him, gently, directly, without a single trace of the wounded desperation he had been, somewhere in the back of his careful mind, bracing for. Charlotte tugged his arm. "William, you've gone pale." "I'm fine." He was not fine. His chest had done something strange and involuntary, a tightening that had nothing to do with the champagne or the heat of the room. He stood in the middle of his own ballroom, surrounded by the finest families in Kent, and felt for the first time in longer than he could account for, genuinely afraid. Not of what she might do, of what that smile meant. He knew the way you know things you have been careful not to examine directly, that it meant something final. The evening moved the way these evenings always moved, in patterns so established they required almost no thought. Toasts were made. Dinner was served. The musicians in the gallery played waltzes that no one truly listened to. Charlotte laughed at the right moments and charmed the right people. And William watched her do it and felt the curious, hollow sensation of a man who has acquired something beautiful and is only now beginning to understand its weight. He kept finding his eyes returning to the east window. Each time, Abigail was exactly as he had left her, composed, present, entirely herself. He watched Lord Ashford take her hand and bow over it with genuine warmth. He watched the Whitfield sisters seek her out specifically, watched her answer them with a calm that made both women look immediately relieved. He watched his wife move through that room and understood, with the slow, sickening clarity of a man confronting something he has been avoiding, that she was not managing herself for anyone's benefit. She had simply already decided something, and he had not been consulted. It was past midnight when the room thinned. The carriages came. The guests filtered out in pairs, the evening folding itself into memory and the gossip that would sustain Kent's drawing rooms for weeks. Charlotte's father collected her with a handshake too long and a smile that suggested he considered the evening a transaction successfully completed. William stood at the foot of the main staircase. The ballroom was nearly empty. 3 servants moved through it with quiet efficiency, collecting glasses, restoring order. 1 chandelier still burned. The musicians had gone. Abigail stood near the fireplace at the far end of the room. She was not waiting for him. That was immediately, uncomfortably clear. She was simply present, hands folded at her waist. Her face turned slightly toward the fire, entirely self-contained in the way of a woman who has learned to need very little from the room around her. He crossed toward her. He told himself it was practical, that some conversation was inevitable, that a man of his position managed things directly rather than allowing them to fester. But the truth, some honest part of him knew this, was that he needed to understand that smile. Needed to understand it the way you need to understand something that has shaken you without touching you. Abigail. No startlement, no performance. Just the quiet turning of a woman who had heard him coming and was not surprised. He looked at her, and the words came out, stripped of every careful layer he usually applied to things he said. Why are you smiling? Not through him. Not past him. At him with a directness he had not felt from her in years, perhaps because he had not been standing still long enough to receive it. The fire crackled. One of the servants dropped something in the far corner and quickly retrieved it. 200 people had been here an hour ago, and now there were 3. Because I finally see you clearly. 7 words, no heat in them. No accusation. No performance of a woman who is barely holding herself together. Just 7 words delivered with the absolute, unhurried certainty of someone who'd been walking toward a conclusion for a very long time and had irrevocably arrived. William stood there. He was a man who had navigated land disputes and legal contracts, and the 1,000 small crises that attend the ownership of a great estate. He was not a man who was easily emptied of language, but those 7 words, those 7 quiet, devastating words, emptied him completely, because they were not a threat. They were not an accusation. They were a goodbye. And he had not seen it coming. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his study, the room where he had spent the great majority of their marriage, behind a closed door, attending to the business of a life he considered important, and he stared at the cold fireplace and tried to identify the moment when things had gone so thoroughly wrong. The problem was that he couldn't find one. There was no rupture he could point to, no argument that had crossed a line, no incident that was, in retrospect, clearly the beginning of the end. There was only the accumulated weight of 1,000 small inattentions. 1,000 evenings when she had been in the same room, and he had not truly seen her. 1,000 mornings when she had offered some quiet observation about the estate or the tenants, and he had nodded without listening. 1,000 times she had reached, in her careful and undemanding way, for some form of genuine connection, and he had provided instead the surface pleasantries of a man who considered himself a good husband, simply because he had never raised his voice. He poured himself brandy and did not drink it. Outside, the grounds of Harrington Manor spread in the autumn dark. The gardens she had designed, the tenant cottages she had quietly insured were properly maintained. The orchards she had overseen when the estate manager fell ill 2 winters ago, and William had been too occupied with London business to notice. He had owned this place for 15 years. He was beginning to understand at 2 in the morning that Abigail had made it. She did not come to breakfast. He registered this with a start, not because it was unusual, but because he suddenly could not remember when it had become usual. She had stopped joining him for breakfast at some point last year. He had not asked why. He had, if he was honest, barely noticed. He ate alone with his correspondence and told himself that last night's conversation would look different in the morning light. It did not look different. It looked exactly the same, only sharper. He found her in the morning room at 9:30, writing at the small desk by the window. She set her pen down when he entered, finished the sentence first, then set it down and turned to face him with the same stillness she had worn in the ballroom, as though she had expected him and was not hurried by his arrival. "I'd like to talk." "Yes," she said. "I expected you would." He sat across from her. The morning room was small and simply furnished. She had always preferred it to the grand receiving rooms, and he had never thought to ask why. Last night was. "Please don't explain last night to me, William." Her tone stopped him cold. Not anger in it, not bitterness. Something quieter and more final than either the flat, settled calm of a woman who has moved past the point where explanations change anything. "You brought Charlotte Whitmore to our home," she continued. "On your arm. In front of 200 people. There is nothing you can explain to me about last night that I do not already understand." He was quiet. "What I want to say to you is that I am not angry. I want you to hear that clearly. You came in here expecting anger, and I want to be truthful. I stopped being as truthful as I should have been years ago, because I realized you had stopped listening. So I am choosing to be truthful now." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," she agreed. "Very little about the past 9 years has been fair." She said it without cruelty, the way a physician states a diagnosis plainly, without flourish, because softening it would not change what it was. "I want to understand what happened," he said. "Do you?" "Yes." "Then I'll tell you something. What happened did not happen last night. Last night was simply the moment I stopped pretending I didn't already know." He stared at her. "You knew about Charlotte. I knew about your growing absence long before Charlotte had a name." She picked up her pen not to write, simply to have something in her hands. "A wife knows. We always know. We simply make different choices about what to do with what we know." "And what choice did you make?" She set the pen down. "I chose to wait," she said, "for a very long time. I made myself quieter, more accommodating, more useful. I told myself that if I was patient enough, you would eventually turn around and see what was standing beside you." A pause. "I was wrong." He said nothing. There was nothing yet to say. The days that followed were the strangest of his life, not because they were dramatic, but because they were almost unbearably ordinary on the surface. Meals were served. The household ran with its usual precision. The estate's affairs continued, without interruption. But something had shifted in the air of Harrington Manor so fundamentally that even the servants seemed to feel it, moving through the corridors with a quieter carefulness, as though the house itself were holding its breath. William found himself watching Abigail, not as a man watches a woman he fears, though there was something in it that resembled fear. As a man watches something he is only now understanding the value of, with the sudden, desperate attention of someone who has let a priceless thing sit unexamined in a corner for years, and has only just picked it up. He watched her speak with Mrs. Hartwell with an ease that spoke of genuine mutual respect built over years. He watched her walk through the kitchen garden, speaking with the groundskeeper, a weathered man of 60, who had said and served the estate since before William's father's time, and who spoke to Abigail with a warmth and deference he had never once offered William himself. One evening he said, "What are you reading?" She looked up. "Wollstonecraft." "Is it good?" "It is clarifying," she said, and returned to her book. He went to find Mrs. Hartwell the next morning. She was in the linen room with one of the younger maids, and when she looked up at his appearance in the doorway, something careful descended over her face. Not hostility. The particular practiced neutrality of a woman who knows a great deal and has been keeping it to herself for a long time. He asked her to come into the corridor. "Lady Abigail manages this household," he said. "She always has. I want to understand exactly what that means." Specifically, Mrs. Hartwell looked at him, not with the deference of a servant being addressed by her employer, with the measuring steadiness of a woman deciding how much truth the moment can hold. "She does everything, my lord," she said. "Be more specific." A beat. Then she was, when the east roof leaked 2 winters past and he was in London. Abigail managed the repair. When the Morrison family fell into arrears, and he would have had them removed, she negotiated privately and saw them through. When 3 harvests came in short, and the workers were frightened, she met with each family herself. When his mother was ill and the physician in Maidstone refused to travel, in January she sent her own carriage and paid the fee from her personal accounts. Her personal accounts. "Yes, my lord. She used her own money, on more than one occasion. I don't believe she mentioned it to you." He had not known. He had lived in this house for 9 years of marriage, and he had not known. "Why didn't she tell me?" Mrs. Hartwell looked at him for a long moment. "I couldn't say, my lord." A careful pause. "Though I imagine she may have tried." At some point, she returned to her linen room. William stood in the corridor with the particular airless sensation of a man who has just walked into a wall he did not know existed. He went to her sitting room that night, a room he almost never entered. He stood among her things and registered the shock of his own ignorance, the books organized with quiet logic along one wall, the writing desk by the window, the small objects arranged with care. A miniature portrait of her mother, a pressed flower under glass, a small clay figure that looked as though it might have been made by a child's hands. He did not touch any of it, but the drawer of the writing desk slid open when he sat down and inadvertently bumped it, and he found them. Letters, a bundle, tied with ribbon, the pages soft with handling. Her handwriting. He untied the ribbon with hands that were not quite steady. "William, I don't know if I will ever give you this, but the words have been living in my chest for so long I am beginning to forget what it feels like not to carry them. Tonight at dinner, you spoke about the Ashford estate for 40 minutes without pausing to ask me a single question. I sat across from you and thought, he does not know that I am lonely. And then I thought something worse. He does not know, because he has not thought to wonder." He set that letter down, picked up another. "I fixed the Morrison cottage today. The youngest child, a girl, brought me a handful of wild violets from the field, and I cried the whole way home in the carriage. I didn't understand why until later. I think it was because she saw me. This little girl, who has nothing, looked at me and truly saw me, and it was so unfamiliar that it broke something open. I wonder sometimes if you would recognize me if you truly looked." Another. "I have been trying to remember the last time you asked me how I was. Not as courtesy, not as the opening of something practical, but genuinely as a person asking another person, 'How are you?' Cannot frightens me." He read every letter, 14 of them, spanning 7 years, each one folded and refolded, as though she had picked it up and held it, and put it back down many times over many evenings, deciding whether the person at the other end of the words would be worth sending them to. She had decided apparently that he would not, and sitting in her small sitting room in the dark, surrounded by 7 years of words she had written to him, and never sent, William Harrington did something he had not done since his father's funeral. He wept, not with grace, not quietly. The kind of weeping that happens when something you have been refusing to feel for a long time finally finds the crack in the wall and comes through all at once. He sat there for a long time. Then he got up, retied the letters with the ribbon exactly as he had found them, closed the drawer, and walked to the garden in the cold dark, and stood there until the feeling had a shape he could carry. He found her the next morning near the stone wall where the last of the autumn roses still clung. She was standing still, looking at something in the middle distance, and she heard him coming and did not turn, immediately gave him time to arrive, which was a kindness he did not deserve. "You were in my sitting room," she said. "Yes." "You found the letters." "Yes." A silence. Something moved across her face. "I should have burned them," she said. "I'm glad you didn't." She turned to look at him then, with that clear, unobstructed gaze that he was beginning to understand had always been her most essential quality, and that he had, somehow, spent 9 years failing to meet. "What do you want, William?" "I want to fix what I've broken." She looked at him for a long time. The wind moved through the dead roses. Somewhere near the kitchen, a door opened and closed. "The difference," she said carefully, "between regret and understanding." He held her gaze. "I'm learning it," he said. "That's all I can honestly tell you." She studied him with those eyes that saw things precisely as they were, that had always seen things precisely as they were. That was in fact the most essential thing about her, the thing he had most profoundly failed to value. "I spent 9 years waiting for you to see me," she said. "I am not going to spend another 9 doing the same." A breath. "So here is what I will tell you, and I will only say it once. I do not know if this can be repaired. I do not know if what you are feeling right now is genuine change or the fear of loss dressed up as change. Those are 2 very different things. I know, do you?" "Yes," he said, "and I know I have to prove it, not in words. In what I do next." She looked at him for a long assessing moment. The kind of moment that has weight. That costs something to wait through. Then she said, "The Morrison family. The youngest child. She brought me violets. Did you read that letter?" "Yes. Her name is Mary. She is 3 years old and she lives 20 minutes east and she calls me Lady Abby and she knows every rabbit on this estate by name." She held his gaze. "You own this land. You have never heard her name before this morning." He said nothing. There was nothing honest he could say. "Walk with me," she said, "to the Morrison cottage. Not to perform something. Not so you can tell yourself you tried. Because I think you need to see what you have been missing." She turned and started walking. He fell into step beside her. And the grounds of Harrington Manor spread around them in the October morning, the estate she had built, the people she had loved, the life she had constructed quietly alongside his, without him ever truly knowing it was happening. And William Harrington walked through all of it and understood, for the first time, that understanding and ownership are not the same thing. He had owned Harrington Manor for 15 years. Abigail had understood it from the beginning. And the distance between those two facts was the distance between the man he had been and the man he was only now, finally, beginning to try to become. The morning after William found the letters, he did not go to his study. That was the first thing that changed. For 9 years, his routine had been as fixed and predictable as the estate's calendar. He rose at 7, he breakfasted alone. He was in his study by 8:30. The door closed. The day's correspondence arranged before him, the world of Harrington Manor reduced to documents and figures, and the manageable abstractions of land ownership. He had believed for 9 years that this was what it meant to run an estate, to manage, to administer, to keep the numbers in order and trust that everything else would take care of itself. Everything else had a name. Her name was Abigail. But that morning he sat at the breakfast table with his coffee going cold in front of him, and he did not move toward his study. He sat there and thought about 14 letters, about 7 years of words she had written to him and never sent, about a little girl named Mary who brought flowers to people she loved and had apparently loved his wife enough to fill her hands with wild violets from a field. He had not known that child existed. He owned the field. When Abigail came down at 8:30, she had always risen later than him, and he had always, privately, considered this a small indulgence he permitted her. She stopped in the doorway of the breakfast room when she saw him still sitting there. Something moved across her face, not quite surprise, more like the cautious recalibration of a woman who has learned not to trust unexpected things. "You haven't left." No, she moved to the sideboard, poured her tea, sat down at the far end of the table, the customary distance between them that had established itself so gradually over the years that neither of them had ever acknowledged it was happening. "I want to ask you something," William said. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "All right, the letter, the one about the little girl. Mary, you wrote that you cried the whole way home in the carriage." He paused. "Why didn't you tell me that? When you came home that day, why didn't you say anything?" Abigail looked at him for a long moment. "Because when I came home that day, you were in your study. And when I knocked, you called through the door that you were in the middle of something. And could it wait? And I said yes." She took a sip of her tea. "It always waited. And then it was never quite the right moment. And then, enough time passed that it felt foolish to bring up. And then I stopped expecting there would be a right moment. A beat. So I wrote it down instead." The words sat between them. Simple, devastating, delivered without accusation, and for that very reason more damning than any accusation could have been. "That happened more than once," he said. "It was not a question." "William," her voice was not unkind, "that happened constantly." He absorbed this. He wanted to argue. Some old reflexive part of him wanted to say that he had always been available, that she had never truly been turned away, that the door to his study was not a closed door so much as a temporary one. He recognized the argument as dishonest before he could form it properly. The door had been closed. He had made her feel that her words could wait, and she had, eventually, stopped bringing them to him at all. "I want to do something today," he said. "What kind of something?" "I want to walk the estate, properly. I want you to come with me and show me everything you've described. The families. I want to see it." Abigail set down her cup very carefully. "Why? Because I don't know my own land," he said. "And I think I should." A silence stretched between them. Not hostile, watchful. "This is not a performance, William." She looked at him directly. "I won't be your guide on a tour that makes you feel better about yourself for a day and changes nothing by next week. I'm not asking you for a tour." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking you to let me start trying to understand what I've been missing." He met her gaze. "I know that's not enough. I know trying is not the same as having already done it. I'm not asking you to forgive me this morning. I'm asking you to walk with me." The clock on the mantelpiece ticked 6 times. Then Abigail stood up. "Get your coat," she said. "The Morrison cottage is 20 minutes east." The walk was quiet at first. Not uncomfortable exactly, but careful, the silence of two people who have lived alongside each other for nearly a decade and are discovering, with some astonishment, that they do not know how to simply walk together. They had attended dinners and balls and Sunday services. They had sat across from each other at table and across from each other in carriages. But William could not remember the last time they had simply walked somewhere, side by side, with no destination that required them to perform anything for anyone. "How long have you known the Morrison family?" he asked. "Since our 2nd year here. Thomas the father came to me because he didn't feel he could come to you." His youngest child was ill, and they had no money for a physician, and he was afraid that asking would put the tenancy at risk. She kept her eyes forward as she walked. He came to the kitchen door. He asked for Mrs. Hartwell. She brought him to me instead. He came to you because he was afraid of me. He came to me because he had heard I might listen. She glanced at him. That is not a condemnation of your character, William. It is simply what happens when a household develops two different faces. The one that manages and the one that governs. And I was the one that governed. You were the one that owned, she said quietly. There's a difference. They walked on. A rabbit startled from the underbrush and shot across the path ahead of them. Abigail watched it go with a faint smile that William found himself studying before he could stop himself. He had forgotten or perhaps never truly registered how her face changed when she was outdoors. The carefully maintained composure of the manner softened into something more genuine, more alive. He had lived beside this woman for 9 years, and he was seeing her face properly for what felt like the first time. The Morrison cottage came into view. It was small and neatly kept, tidier than he would have expected. The small yard swept clean, the window frames recently whitewashed. A kitchen garden ran along the south wall, late autumn cabbages still standing in their rows. Someone had repaired the gate recently. The new wood was lighter than the old. Before they reached it, the door opened. A woman appeared around 30, brown-haired, with the kind of face that had once been pretty and was now simply capable. She looked tired in the way that mothers of young children are permanently tired. But when she saw Abigail, something in her face lifted entirely. Lady Abigail. She came down the path with genuine warmth. We weren't expecting. She stopped when she saw William. Her expression shifted, not fearful exactly. More the careful composure of a woman who has learned to be measured around people who hold power over her life. Mrs. Morrison. Abigail stepped forward and took the woman's hands briefly in hers, a gesture so natural it was clearly habitual. I hope we're not interrupting. I wanted Lord Harrington to see how the repairs turned out. Mrs. Morrison looked from Abigail to William, and back again. They've held up beautifully, my lady. Thomas said. He said it's the best the roof has been since we came here. Good. Abigail turned to William. The east section was leaking into the children's room. We had it addressed in February. She had said we without thinking. And then she heard herself say it. And something flickered briefly in her expression, a kind of wry, private recognition that she did not elaborate on. William looked at the cottage. At the new section of roof, visible from where they stood. Mrs. Morrison, he said carefully. Your children, Thomas, Eleanor, and Mary. Mrs. Morrison blinked. Clearly she had not expected him to know their names. Yes, my lord. A beat of silence. Then they're very well, my lord. Thank you. A pause. Mary's inside, if you shall want to say hello to Lady Abigail. As if on cue, the cottage door burst open and a small figure hurled itself down the path with the total commitment to velocity that only a not-quite-4-year-old can achieve. Lady Abby. Abigail caught her. She caught this child the way you catch someone you know well without hesitation, her arms already open before Mary reached them, swinging her up with an ease that suggested this was not the first time. The little girl threw both arms around Abigail's neck and buried her face there with a ferocity of affection that made something in William's chest contract sharply. There you are, Abigail said into the child's hair. I was wondering if you'd grown. I grew a whole inch, Mary announced, pulling back to hold up one finger as evidence. Mama measured, I can see that. The child turned her enormous dark eyes on William with the unfiltered curiosity of someone who has not yet learned that staring is impolite. Who's that man? That, Abigail said, is Lord Harrington. He owns this land. Mary considered this information seriously. Does he know about the rabbits? William heard himself say. What rabbits? The rabbits in the south field. There's a family of them under the old stone wall. I named them. She looked at him with great solemnity. You're not allowed to hunt them. Mrs. Morrison began. It's all right. William crouched down to the child's level, an instinct he didn't know he had. I won't hunt them. What are their names? Mary stared at him for a long assessing moment. Then she decided apparently that he was trustworthy. She began listing the names of every rabbit. William listened to every single one. They walked back to the manor in a different kind of silence. Something had shifted between the going and the returning. Some small but significant thing that neither of them named directly. William was quiet for longer than was comfortable. And Abigail let him be quiet, because she had learned long ago that his silences were rarely empty. They were the places where he processed things he didn't yet have words for. Finally he said, she didn't hesitate. Who? Mary. When she saw you. She didn't hesitate for a single second. Abigail was quiet. Children that age. He stopped. Tried again. They don't perform affection. They go toward what is real. Abigail agreed. They don't perform. She loves you. I have known her since she was 6 weeks old. A pause. I was there when she was born, actually. Mrs. Morrison had a difficult labor, and the midwife from the village was delayed in the snow. I stayed. She said it simply, without weight, the way you might mention having once caught an early train. William, there are 14 families on this land who have called on me the way that family has. Not because I am remarkable, because I was present. He stopped walking. She went 2 more steps before she realized and turned back. I want to ask you something else, he said. And I need you to answer me honestly, even if the answer is the kind that hurts. She waited. Did you love this life? The work, the families, the all of it? Setting aside everything else. Did you love it? Something changed in her face. The careful composure did not break exactly, but it softened, and what showed through was so genuine and unguarded that he almost looked away. Yes, she said, I loved every bit of it, even while you were unhappy. The work and the unhappiness were separate things. William, I was unhappy in my marriage. I was not unhappy in my life a beat. That distinction took me a long time to understand. I spent years confusing the two, believing that if I was miserable with you, I must be miserable entirely. She looked at him with something that was almost compassion. I wasn't. I had built something real here, something that mattered. The misery was specifically about you. He absorbed this blow with perfect stillness. That's honest, he said. You asked for honest. They started walking again. After a while, he said, the letters. The one where you wrote that you couldn't remember the last time I asked how you were. That was he exhaled. How long ago was that letter? 3 years, she said, give or take, 3 years. He had been living beside a woman who was quietly documenting the erosion of their marriage for 3 years, and he had not noticed. What were you doing 3 years ago? Her voice was not cruel, genuinely curious. What was occupying you so completely that you didn't notice? He thought about it honestly. The Ashford land negotiations. The London investment. There was that business with the mill in the spring. There was always a business, she said quietly. There was always something that required your full attention. And I was always the thing that could wait. The words landed exactly as hard as she meant them to. Not because you didn't care, she continued. I want to be accurate, William, not unfair. I don't think you were deliberately unkind. I think you arranged your world by priority, and I was in a category that you believed would sustain itself. That did not require tending. That would be there, reliable and waiting, whenever you returned from whatever else needed you. Like the estate itself, he said slowly, I assumed it ran. Because I made it run. The faintest edge of something not quite bitterness, but its more dignified cousin sharpened her voice for just a moment. And because I made it invisible. I solved problems before they became visible to you. I smoothed things over before they required your attention. I protected you from the daily reality of this place, because I thought that was what a good wife did. A pause. And you let me. Because it was convenient to let me. And because you never asked what it cost me. They had reached the edge of the formal gardens now. The manor was visible ahead of them, its stone face solid and familiar against the pewter October sky. What did it cost you? He asked. She looked at it, their home, for a long moment before she answered. Myself, she said, piece by piece, without quite noticing it was happening. I became so good at managing and maintaining and holding everything together that I forgot to hold on to what I wanted. What I thought, what I felt. She turned to look at him. Do you know what I used to want, William? When we were first married. Tell me, I wanted to travel. I wanted to see Rome. I wanted to study painting seriously, not as a ladylike accomplishment. I wanted to have conversations that lasted past midnight about things that mattered. Her voice was level, but something in it was very old. I wanted a husband who was curious about me, not just satisfied with me. Curious. William said nothing. I stopped wanting those things, she continued, not because I outgrew them. But because wanting things that were never going to happen is its own particular form of cruelty. So I redirected. I found meaning in the work, in the families, in the small daily satisfactions of making things better for people who needed them made better. She paused. And it was real meaning, William. I am not saying it wasn't, but it was also a consolation, and I have only very recently allowed myself to admit that. He stood beside her and looked at the manor and felt the full, crushing weight of everything he hadn't known he didn't know. The night of the ball, he said. Your smile, when I came to ask you why. It was the first time in years I had felt completely clear, she said. Not happy, not relieved, just clear. Like a window that had been filmed over for so long that you stopped noticing it wasn't transparent. And then suddenly it was. She glanced at him. I saw you walk in with her and I felt something I hadn't expected. What? Release a pause, because it confirmed what I had already known. And knowing something, even something painful, is always better than the exhaustion of pretending you don't. They went inside. It was Mrs. Hartwell who forced the next confrontation, not intentionally, and perhaps not even consciously, but in the way that long-suffering witnesses sometimes force things simply by being finally, irrevocably honest. She came to William's study that afternoon, which had never happened in 9 years. He looked up from his desk when she appeared in the doorway, straight, composed, with the particular expression of a woman who has decided that something needs to be said and has determined that she is the one who must say it. Mrs. Hartwell, my lord, I apologize for the interruption. She did not look apologetic. I wanted to speak with you about something, if you'll permit it. Sit down. She did not sit down. He had offered because it seemed correct. She remained standing because she was, he understood in that moment, not here as an employee seeking a comfortable conversation. Last spring, she began, when the 3 families in the North Quarter were struggling, the Pearces, the Henleys, and the Griffins. You may not recall. There was a cold snap in March that damaged the early crops. He did not recall. He said nothing. Lady Abigail spent 4 weeks working alongside those families. Not directing, not managing from a distance. She was in those cottages. She helped with the children while the mothers worked. She organized the food stores from the manor kitchen with my assistance and with your cooks, though you were not informed, so that no family went without through April. Mrs. Hartwell's voice was perfectly even. She was also, during that same 4-week period, corresponding with you in London about the refurbishment of the East drawing room because you had written to say you were considering it and wanted her thoughts. William was very still. She answered those letters, thoughtfully and thoroughly. She gave you her opinion on the wallpapers and the draperies and the placement of the new furniture. A beat. She did not mention the families. She did not mention what she was doing. She simply handled both things, as she always does. And you received the letters about the wallpapers and responded with your preferences and continued on. Why are you telling me this? Mrs. Hartwell looked at him steadily. Because, my lord, I have served this household for 23 years, and in that time I have watched Lady Abigail give everything she had to this place and to the people in it, and I have watched her do it quietly, without recognition, without complaint, and without thanks from the one person whose thanks would have meant something to her. She paused. I am telling you this because I am old enough and have been here long enough to say it without losing my position over it, and because if something is not said directly, it will not be heard. William looked at the woman across his desk. She had served his family since before his marriage. She had managed this household alongside Abigail with loyalty and discretion, and the particular fierce protectiveness of a woman who has watched someone she respects be undervalued for too long. You're right, he said. Mrs. Hartwell blinked. Apparently she had been prepared for more resistance. You are entirely right, he said again, and I am sorry not only to Abigail, to you, for not having asked. A long pause, then something in Mrs. Hartwell's expression shifted barely, but enough. The rigid posture of a woman braced for a fight softened fractionally into something that might, in different circumstances, have become relief. Thank you, my lord, she said. Will there be anything else? Yes, one thing. He leaned forward. Is there anything this household needs, anything Abigail has been managing, that she should not have had to manage alone that I should address immediately? Mrs. Hartwell was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then she said, I'll have a list for you by supper. The list was 6 pages long. William read it twice, then sat with it in his hands for a long time in the growing dark of his study, and felt the ground shift permanently beneath every assumption he had held about his own home. 6 pages of quietly managed crises. 6 pages of problems Abigail had solved, needs she had met, gaps she had filled, people she had helped, all of it accomplished without fanfare, without credit, without so much as a note in the household accounts that bore his name. He went to find her. She was in the library, the same place he had seen her the week before, curled into the chair by the fire with her book, entirely self-contained. But this time when he came in and sat down across from her, she didn't return immediately to her reading. She watched him instead. with the careful attention of a woman reading weather. Mrs. Hartwell gave me a list, he said. She mentioned she might. 6 pages, Abigail. She held his gaze. Yes, you've been carrying this for how long? How long has it been this much? It has always been this much, she said simply. The volume varies with the season. But there has never been a week in 9 years that was not full. He set the list on the table between them. Why didn't you ever show me this? She looked at the pages for a moment. Because every time I tried to show you something, you found a way to not quite see it, she said. Not deliberately. You would listen. You were always willing to listen for a few minutes, and then something would recapture your attention, and I would finish my sentence to a room that had already moved on. And so eventually I stopped showing you things. She paused. It is a particular kind of loneliness, William. To live beside someone and feel perpetually invisible to them. I don't think you ever intended it. But intention is cold comfort to the person living the experience. He looked at her. I have been a bad husband. She considered this. You have been an absent one, she said, which is in its own way worse, because an unkind husband is one you can point to. An absent one is one you spend years wondering if you imagined. The fire crackled. A log shifted, sending a brief spray of sparks upward. I don't want to be absent, he said. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that he wondered if she would answer at all. Long enough that the fire burned lower and the room grew quieter, and something very true and very fragile hung in the air between them. The problem, she said at last, is that I no longer know if I have it in me to believe that. The words struck him like cold water. Not angry words. Not bitter ones. Just honest ones. Spoken by a woman who had reached the end of a very long road and had nothing left to spend on hope that had not yet proven itself worth the price. And William Harrington, who had spent 9 years being comfortable, being certain, being a man who was never truly afraid of anything he could not manage, felt, for the first time, genuinely, searingly afraid. Not of losing the estate, not of losing his reputation or his standing or any of the things he had spent his adult life carefully maintaining. Afraid of losing her. The woman who had built this home while he owned it. The woman who had loved these people while he administered them. The woman who had written 14 letters to him over 7 years and never sent a single one because she had stopped believing he would read them. Tell me what it would take, he said. His voice was rough. Tell me what you need from me to believe it. Abigail looked at him, and what crossed her face in that moment was not hope, not yet. It was something more complicated and more honest than hope. It was the expression of a woman who has been hurt enough times to know better, deciding whether the person across from her has finally, truly arrived in the room. Not intentions, not apologies, not promises. She folded her hands in her lap. I've had years of William Harrington's good intentions. I need to see something different. Then you'll see something different. She held his gaze. We'll see, she said. It was not forgiveness. It was not even the beginning of forgiveness. But it was a door barely cracked, barely open, the thinnest sliver of light in a long dark room. And William understood, with absolute clarity, that if he let it close again, it would not open a third time. He got up, picked up the 6-page list from the table, folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. I'll start tomorrow, he said. He walked to the door, and then because something in him needed to say it, even if she was not yet ready to receive it, he stopped. I see you, Abigail. His back was still to her. I know that's 9 years too late, but I need you to know that I see you now. He heard her breathe. Then he walked out and closed the library door behind him. Inside the room, Abigail sat very still for a long moment. She looked at the fire. She thought about 14 letters. She thought about Mary Morrison and her wild violets. She thought about the word clearly, the 7 words she had spoken to him in a ballroom full of 200 people, and she turned them over in her mind like a stone, examining every facet. Then she opened her book. And she did something she had not done in 9 years. She did not try to be invisible. She sat in the library of Harrington Manor, and she simply existed in it fully, quietly, without apology, and she let herself take up exactly as much space as she needed. It was a small thing, and it was the beginning of everything. He started the next morning, not with a grand gesture, not with flowers or declarations or the kind of theatrical redemption that would have been, under the circumstances, deeply unconvincing. He started the way Abigail had always started things, quietly, practically, without announcement. He was up before dawn. Mrs. Hartwell, arriving in the kitchen at 6:30, found him already there, seated at the long wooden table, with her 6-page list spread in front of him and a pot of tea gone lukewarm at his elbow. He had been there long enough that the candle he'd lit had burned down a full inch. She stopped in the doorway. "My lord." "The Pierce family," he said without looking up. "The list says the youngest boy has been coughing since September and they haven't had a physician. Why hasn't anyone sent for Dr. Calloway?" Mrs. Hartwell came into the kitchen and set about relighting the stove with the calm efficiency of a woman who does not waste energy on surprise. Because the last time a physician was called for a tenant family, the bill was forwarded to the estate accounts and you returned it with a note saying discretionary expenditures required your prior approval. He looked up. 2 years ago last February, my lord." He stared at her. Then he looked back at the list. Then back at her. "Send for Dr. Calloway today. The bill comes to me. No prior approval required for anything related to the health of anyone on this estate ever again." He paused. "Please add that to whatever instructions govern the household accounts." Mrs. Hartwell poured herself a cup of tea. "Yes, my lord. What else on this list is urgent?" She sat down across from him, which he suspected was something she had never done in his presence before, and they went through it together. All 6 pages, item by item for the better part of 2 hours, while the kitchen filled with the sounds of the household waking around them, and the thin November light began filtering through the windows. By the time Abigail came downstairs at 8 o'clock, they were on the final page. She appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped. Her husband was seated at the servants' table. Her housekeeper was across from him. Between them were 6 pages of notes, 2 empty cups, and the evidence of a conversation that had clearly been going on for some time. Mrs. Hartwell looked up. Something in her expression, carefully neutral, professionally composed, communicated everything. Abigail looked at William. He looked back at her. "Dr. Calloway is being sent to the Pierce boy this morning," he said. "The Griffin family's fence has been in disrepair since July. I've asked Morrison to look at it today. The Henley roof needs proper attention before the winter sets in, not the temporary patch that's been holding since March." He paused. "I should have known about all of this." "Yes," she said. Not unkindly, simply truthfully. "I'm going to the Henley cottage after breakfast. I want to assess it myself before I bring in anyone to work on it." He stood, gathering the pages. "You don't have to come. A beat." "I know," she said. She went to the stove and poured her tea, and he went to get his coat, and Mrs. Hartwell cleared the cups with the private expression of a woman who is watching something she has wanted to watch for a very long time and is not entirely sure yet how it ends. The Henley cottage was worse than the list had suggested. William stood inside it for 10 minutes and felt something that he could only describe afterward as shame. Not the abstract shame of a man who has been told he did wrong. The concrete, physical shame of a man standing in a leaking building on land he owns and understanding, fully and without excuse, that the people sleeping in this building had been waiting for someone to care and had been quietly, patiently, waiting for far too long. Thomas Henley was 43 years old. He had the weathered face and careful hands of a man who works outdoors in all weathers, and he received William's arrival with a composure that cost him something William could see it costing him. The effort of standing straight and being dignified in front of the man who held his family's security in his hands. "My lord," he took off his hat. "This is an honor." "Don't." The word came out before William could shape it more delicately. Henley blinked. "Please don't be formal with me. I've come because I should have come 2 years ago and I didn't, and I'd rather not compound that with ceremony." Henley stared at him. His wife appeared in the doorway behind him, a small, sharp-eyed woman who had clearly been listening from the moment she heard the horses. "Lord Harrington would like to see the roof." "Martha," Henley said, recovering first. Martha Henley looked William directly in the eye, not defiantly, simply with the absolute unblinking steadiness of a woman who has nothing left to lose through honesty. "The east corner comes through when it rains," she said. "We've been putting a bucket there since August. My husband's written twice to the estate manager." "I didn't know that." "No," she said, "you didn't." It was not anger in her voice. It was simply fact. The tone of a woman who has moved past anger into something quieter and more permanent, the flat, tired accents of someone who stopped expecting to be heard. It hit him harder than anger would have. He spent an hour at the Henley cottage. He looked at every room. He listened to everything Martha Henley told him, and she told him a great deal. Once she understood, he was genuinely listening, the words coming out of her in a stream that had clearly been building up pressure for a long time. By the time he left, he had a full picture and a list of his own, written in his own hand, of everything that needed to be done. Walking back to the manor, he passed the Morrison cottage. Mary was in the yard. She saw him immediately and ran to the gate without hesitation, which startled him completely. "Lord Harrington, did you see the rabbits?" "Not today. I was at the Henley cottage." She frowned with enormous seriousness. "Is Mrs. Henley's roof still broken?" He crouched down the way he had the first time. "I'm going to fix it." Mary considered this. "Then Lady Abby said someone would fix it eventually. She said some people just need more time to notice things." He was very still. "Did she say that?" "She says it about lots of things." Mary swung on the gate with comfortable familiarity. "She says patience isn't the same as giving up. She says sometimes you have to wait for people to catch up." He stood. He thanked the child with complete seriousness, the way you thank someone who has just told you something genuinely important, and walked back to the manor with Mary's words moving through him like a current. Some people just need more time to notice things. She had said that to a 4-year-old. She had been saying it, apparently, about him, with enough patience that she had turned it into something she taught children. The realization sat in his chest like a coal warm and burning simultaneously. Abigail was in the morning room when he returned. She was writing correspondence, always correspondence, the management of 100 quiet obligations, but she set her pen down when he came in, and he was struck again by the particular quality of her attention when she gave it. She didn't half listen. She turned toward you completely or not at all. He had not valued that. He understood that now. "The Henley roof," he said. "It's bad. I'm bringing in proper craftsmen, not the estate handyman. It should have been done in the spring." "Yes. Martha Henley told me her husband wrote to the estate manager twice." "I know. I saw the letters. They were filed without being forwarded to you." A pause. "I should have intervened directly. I chose instead to work through the proper channels and hope the manager would act." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because by then I had told you a dozen things that didn't reach you, and I no longer trusted that one more would be different." She picked up her pen again, then set it back down. "I am telling you this not to assign blame, but because you asked, and because I think you deserve an honest accounting." "I do deserve it." He sat down across from her. "Mary Morrison told me something when I was walking back." Abigail's expression shifted, a small, involuntary softening at the mention of the child. "She told me you said some people just need more time to notice things." A silence. "Children repeat everything," Abigail said, and something in her voice was carefully light. "Were you talking about me?" She looked at him for a moment. "I was talking about a situation that involved you, among others." A beat. "I didn't say it bitterly, William. I said it to help a child understand why the adults around her didn't always behave the way she thought they should." "And did it help her?" She seemed satisfied, a ghost of a smile. She moved on to discussing the rabbits, which is generally how she signals that a subject is resolved. He almost laughed. The almost surprised him. "She told me the rabbits' names again," he said. "All of them. She does that. She considers it foundational information." They sat in the morning room in something that was not quite comfortable silence, not quite uncomfortable, something in between, something that was perhaps the beginning of a new kind of quiet between them, one that didn't require either of them to perform. Then he said, "I need to speak with you about something harder." She stilled. "Charlotte Whitmore." The name entered the room like weather, dropping the temperature by several degrees in the space of a single syllable. Abigail did not look away from him. She did not reach for her pen or adjust her posture, or do any of the small deflective things a person does when they are bracing for something. She simply waited. "I need to explain it to you," he said. "Not to excuse it. There is no excusing it. But because you deserve to understand what happened, and I've been a coward about saying it directly." "Then say it directly." "I was lonely," he said. The word fell into the silence and sat there. Abigail did not move. "Not the way you were lonely," he continued, and his voice was rough with the effort of honesty. "I understand the difference, and I'm not asking you to equate them. But somewhere in the past few years I became aware that there was a distance between us that I didn't know how to cross. And rather than face that, rather than do the difficult thing of asking why it was there or trying to bridge it, I turned outward." He paused. She was attentive. She laughed at things I said. She asked about my work. She made me feel interesting. "She made you feel seen," Abigail said quietly. "Yes. Which is what you should have been making me feel." "For 9 years." He said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. "The cruelty of it." "William," she said, and her voice was still controlled. But something beneath it was not. Something that had weight and heat. is not that you found someone who gave you attention. It's that attention was available to you the entire time. From me I tried, for years I tried, and you were comfortable enough with my presence that you didn't need to try back. A pause. So when someone who was not me made the effort, it felt like a revelation. And what it was, actually, was simply what a marriage is supposed to feel like. He closed his eyes briefly. You're right, I know I'm right. No triumph in it. Just exhaustion. That's the part that has kept me awake more nights than I can count. Not the anger I could have managed anger. The sheer grinding awareness that I was right about all of it, and it didn't change anything. It's changing things now. She looked at him. Is it? Or are you frightened? And change is what frightened men offer when they realize what they're about to lose. The question landed like a slap. He sat with it because it was fair, because she was owed the full honesty and not the managed version of it, and because she was perceptive enough that managed honesty, not psycharm, survived scrutiny for 30 seconds. Both, he said. Both. I am frightened. And I also, he stopped. I walked through this estate today and I saw my home as if for the first time. I saw what you have built here, and I understood what it cost you, and I felt something I cannot adequately name. Not guilt, larger than guilt. Something that requires me to be a different person than I have been. Abigail was very still. That is either the most honest thing you have ever said to me, she said slowly, or you are more skilled at the language of sincerity than I realized. Which do you think it is? She studied him for a long time. Long enough that he felt genuinely exposed, which was, he realized with a start, an unfamiliar sensation. He was not accustomed to being read. I think, she said carefully, that you are being honest. I also think that being honest and being changed are two different things. And I think that is a distinction you are only beginning to understand. Then let me keep learning it. She stood. I'm going to the Pierce family this afternoon. Dr. Calloway should have been there by noon. She moved toward the door, then paused. You may come if you'd like. It was not an invitation wrapped in warmth. It was bare and practical and honest. The way everything she did was honest once she stopped managing herself for his comfort. But it was an invitation. I'll get my coat, he said. Dr. Calloway had been there. The youngest Pierce boy, 7 years old, called James, with enormous solemn eyes, and his father's ears, was sleeping when they arrived, properly sleeping for the first time in weeks, his breathing quieter than it had been. His mother sat beside him with the particular exhausted relief of a woman who has spent too long being afraid and has only just been permitted to stop. She stood when Abigail came in, and the look that passed between them was the look of two women who have been through something together and understand each other at a level beyond words. She's been giving him the syrup Dr. Calloway left, the eldest Pierce daughter reported. She was 14, practical, with ink-stained fingers that suggested she was more educated than anyone had formally arranged. He said to come back in 3 days. Good. Abigail touched the sleeping boy's forehead with the back of her hand automatically, the gesture of someone who has done this before, and then looked at the mother. You should sleep too, Ellen. He's going to be all right. Ellen Pierce looked at William. She had not spoken to him since he entered. She did not speak to him now. But she looked at him with an expression he could not have described, precisely some complicated mixture of acknowledgement and assessment, and a careful, guarded thing that was perhaps the beginning of a willingness to revise. Then she looked back at Abigail. Will you stay for tea? A little while, Abigail said. William sat in the corner of the small cottage and drank tea from a chipped cup, and listened to his wife talk with this woman about her children, her garden, the book her eldest daughter had asked for at Christmas, the way the winter was coming in earlier this year. He listened to Abigail ask questions and mean them. He listened to Ellen Pierce answer and relax, degree by degree, into a conversation with someone she trusted. He had never sat in a tenant's home before. He had never drunk tea from a chipped cup in a cottage kitchen. He had missed. He understood suddenly an enormous amount of what his life actually contained. They walked home in the early dark, the cold air sharp between them, their breath misting. The Pierce girl, he said. The eldest, she has ink on her fingers. She reads everything she can get her hands on. She's brilliant. Abigail's voice carried a quiet fierceness. Absolutely brilliant. She should be educated properly. Can we arrange it? Abigail stopped walking. She turned to look at him. In the dim light, he couldn't read her expression precisely, but something in her posture had changed a stillness that was not her composed, managed stillness, but something rawer, closer to genuine shock. Can we arrange it? She repeated. Yes, if she's as capable as you say. I've been trying to arrange it, she said, for 2 years. I wrote to the headmistress of a school in Maidstone. I had a correspondence going. And then your solicitor, acting on standing instructions about estate expenditures, declined the funding request. The cold air sat between them. I didn't know about that, he said. You didn't, a pause. Standing instructions, William. You had standing instructions that were functioning in your name, making decisions in your name, that you had never reviewed, and I had no authority to override. He thought about the solicitor's letter, some routine communication he had signed off on years ago about discretionary expenditures and estate management protocols. He had not given it a second thought. He had not imagined that such a letter could travel through the machinery of his estate and land on a 14-year-old girl's future. I'll contact the school tomorrow, he said. The girl will have her education, full funding, whatever she needs. Abigail was quiet for so long that he turned to look at her. Don't thank me, he said quickly. This is correction, not generosity. I know, her voice was strange. I know, she stopped. Breathed. That child has been waiting 2 years, William. Her mother told her to be patient. I told her to be patient. A pause. We will all have to reckon with the fact that the waiting was not necessary. Yes, he said, we will. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Not the silence of two people with nothing to say, but the silence of two people carrying something large and complicated together, and finding, tentatively, that the weight distributes differently when you share it. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It came in the Morning Post, addressed to William in a hand he recognized immediately, Charlotte Whitmore's looping, confident script. He was in his study when it arrived, and he read it standing at his desk without sitting down. She was writing, she said, to clarify their understanding. She had spoken with her father. She believed that William's intentions had been communicated, however obliquely, and she was prepared to proceed with whatever arrangements seemed appropriate. She looked forward to his convenience. He read the letter twice. Then he walked to the fireplace and burned it. He watched it catch and curl and become ash, and he felt something settle in him, not righteousness, not relief, but a kind of sober, final clarity. The same clarity he had seen on Abigail's face in the ballroom. The same clarity she had told him felt like a window finally cleaned. He sat down and wrote a reply. He wrote it without drafting at first, which was unlike him. He was a precise man who wrote precise letters and revised them until the language was exactly right. But this one came out whole, because it required nothing more than honesty. And honesty, he was learning, rarely needed revision. He told Charlotte Whitmore that he had misled her, whether through action or omission, or the comfortable dishonesty of a man who had not yet understood what he stood to lose. He told her that he was sorry for that. He told her that he would not be pursuing any further arrangement and that he hoped her path forward would be a good one. He did not offer a lengthy explanation. He did not ask for understanding. He sealed it and addressed it and rang for the footman. When the footman left with the letter, William sat in his study for a moment in the quiet. Then he got up and went to find Abigail. She was in the library, her library. The room, he was beginning to understand, was the most honest room in the house. She was not reading. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, which was unusual enough that he noticed it immediately. "Are you all right?" She looked up. Something in her face was unguarded, in a way that suggested she had been thinking very hard about something painful. "I received a visitor this morning," she said, "while you were out." He waited. Lady Gresham. He went very still. Lady Gresham was the most accomplished social architect in Kent, a woman who assembled and dismantled reputations with the same practiced ease that other women arranged flowers. She had been a fixture of the county's social world for 30 years, and she operated, always, in service of what she considered correct social order. What did she want? She came, Abigail said, with a careful evenness that he recognized as her protective tone, the voice she used when she was managing something difficult, to advise me. To advise you. She told me that my situation was becoming a topic of conversation in the county. She told me that I would be well advised to handle it discreetly. She told me that William Harrington's reputation was an asset to our family, and that whatever personal difficulties we might be experiencing, they were best managed privately. A pause. She then suggested that if I chose to leave the marriage, I would find myself in a position of considerable social difficulty, and that I ought to consider that carefully before making any decisions. William felt something hot move through him. She came to this house and said that to you. She said it very politely, a beat. That is the thing about Lady Gresham, she is always very polite. She threatened you. She informed me of my options in a way that was designed to reduce them. Abigail's voice remained level. She was not wrong, incidentally. The social mathematics are what she described them to be. A woman in my position, should I leave, would face difficulties. That is simply true. Then no. She stood up, and her voice carried something he hadn't heard in it before, something clean and absolute that required no volume to cut through anything in its way. Do not go and speak to Lady Gresham on my behalf. Do not manage this situation like an estate problem, William. This is my life. I will manage what happens to my life. He stopped. What I am telling you, she continued, is not a problem for you to solve. I am telling you because you are my husband, and because I have spent 9 years not telling you things that you deserve to know. I am trying to do this differently. She looked at him directly. Lady Gresham's visit did not intimidate me. It clarified something. What? That the world is arranged to make it difficult for a woman to choose herself. A breath. And that I have been complying with that arrangement for my entire adult life because I believed it was the only option. Her chin lifted slightly. I no longer believe that. The room was very quiet. He looked at his wife, really looked at her, the way he was learning to do, and he saw something in her face that he was quite certain had always been there, and that he had never, until now, properly seen. Strength, not the performed strength of a woman managing her composure. Something older and more fundamental. The strength of someone who has been bent almost to breaking and has discovered, in the bending, exactly where their limits are. What are you going to do? He asked. I'm going to continue exactly as I have been. She held his gaze. I am going to tend to the families on this estate. I am going to manage the household. I am going to be present in my own life, in my own home, in my own way. A pause. And I am going to stop being invisible while I do it. He understood, in that moment, that she was not saying this for his benefit. She was saying it for her own. And the difference between those two things was the difference between the Abigail of 9 years and the Abigail standing in front of him now, and it was vast, and it was irreversible, and it was the most important thing he had seen in this entire unraveling and rebuilding of his understanding of his own life. She good, he said. She blinked, clearly not what she had expected. I mean it, he said. Don't stop, don't disappear back into, don't manage yourself down for my comfort or anyone else's. Don't make yourself smaller. He met her eyes. I am asking you directly, as the person who has benefited from invisibility at enormous cost to you, please don't. A silence. Then something crossed her face, fleeting, almost too quick to catch, that was not forgiveness, and not resolution, and not the end of anything. It was something more like the very first, tentative, entirely uncertain green of something that has been dormant, and is only just beginning to consider whether the conditions might finally be right for it to grow. All right, she said quietly. Just that, all right. But it was the most honest 2 words she had spoken to him in years, and they both knew it. He had burned Charlotte Whitmore's letter that morning. He had sat in a tenant's cottage and drunk tea from a chipped cup and listened. He had asked about a girl with ink-stained fingers and meant it. He had said, don't make yourself smaller, to his wife, and meant that too. None of it was enough, he knew that. The ground between who he had been and who he needed to become was enormous, and he had taken only the first few steps across it. And Abigail was watching those steps with the careful, clear-eyed attention of a woman who had been deceived by comfort before and was not going to be deceived by it again. But somewhere in the house, in the kitchen, maybe, or the linen room, or the servants' hall, where word traveled faster than anything written, Mrs. Hartwell was crossing something off a list, and in a cottage at the edge of the estate, a girl with ink-stained fingers was about to receive a letter that would change her life. And in the library of Harrington Manor, Abigail Mercer sat back down in her chair, not invisibly, not carefully, not with the managed smallness of a woman who has learned to take up as little space as possible, but simply solidly, wholly herself. And for the first time in 9 years, the room felt like it belonged to her. Not because William had given it to her, because she had finally stopped giving it away. The letter to the school in Maidstone went out on a Friday. By Monday, William had received a reply. He brought it to Abigail at breakfast, not slid across the table, not left on her writing desk for later. He walked into the breakfast room and placed it directly in her hands while she was still holding her tea, because he had decided, sometime in the last week, that directness was the only currency he had left that was worth anything. She set down her cup and read it. He watched her face. He had become, in the last 2 weeks, a student of her face in a way he had never been in 9 years of marriage. The small movements of it, the things she controlled, and the things that slipped through anyway. She read, with the same focused attention she brought to everything, and when she reached the end of the letter, something happened at the corners of her eyes, a tightening that she managed before it became anything more, but that he caught anyway. "They'll take her," he said. "Full scholarship. Spring term." I read it. Her voice was careful. I wrote to the headmistress directly. Explained the situation. She had apparently received your earlier correspondence, and she said she had been hoping the funding matter would be resolved. Abigail set the letter down on the table. She was quiet for a moment that stretched longer than was comfortable. "Ellen Pierce doesn't know yet," she finally said. "I thought you might want to tell her." She looked up at him then quickly, with an expression he couldn't fully decode, something layered and complicated and raw at its edges. She looked at him the way you look at someone when they have done something you needed them to do 2 years ago, and they have finally done it, and you don't know whether to feel grateful or grief-stricken, because the gratitude and the grief are sitting right on top of each other and cannot be separated. "Thank you," she said. No embellishment. No qualification. "Don't thank me," he said the same words he'd said before, and he meant them the same way. "Just take the letter to her." She took the letter to Ellen Pierce that afternoon. William did not go with her. He stayed at the manor and worked through the remaining items on Mrs. Hartwell's list, and he tried not to watch the clock, and he failed at that. And when he heard Abigail's footsteps in the corridor, 2 hours later he found himself standing before he'd consciously cited to. She came into the study doorway. Her eyes were bright. Not with the tears exactly, or perhaps with the specific brightness that happens when tears have been very recently present and very recently blinked away. "How did she take it?" he asked. "Sarah." Abigail's voice was not quite steady. "The girl's name is Sarah. I always called her the Pierce girl in my head because I was trying not to want things I couldn't deliver." A breath. She read the letter 3 times. Then she asked her mother if it was real. Then she sat down on the floor, just sat down. Right where she was. Couldn't quite make it to a chair. Something that was almost a laugh moved through her. "I sat down with her. We sat on the floor of that cottage kitchen for 20 minutes, and her mother cried, and I may have cried as well, which I will neither confirm nor deny." William looked at his wife, at this woman who had fought, quietly and without recognition, for a 14-year-old girl's future for 2 years, and who had sat down on the floor of a cottage kitchen to receive the good news, because that was exactly the kind of person she was. "I will confirm it," he said. "You definitely cried." She looked startled. Then she laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh in he couldn't remember how long. Long enough that the sound of it struck him somewhere in the chest and stayed there. "You weren't even there," she said. "I know you." The words landed between them, and neither of them moved, and the clock on the mantelpiece ticked, and something shifted in the room, subtle and seismic simultaneously, the way the most important shifts always are. "Do you?" She was quiet. Not a challenge. A genuine question. "I'm learning to," he said. "I know that's not the same as knowing. But I'm learning." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she straightened. "The Henley roof," she said, returning to the practical with the ease of a woman who has used practical things as armor for years. "The craftsmen are coming Thursday. Wednesday, actually." "I moved it up." She paused. "You moved it up. The weather is turning. I didn't want them to lose another week to rain." A beat. Then she nodded. Once, and went to her morning room, and William stood in his study and felt the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding something that should never have been broken, and understood, more clearly than he ever had, that there is a difference between the work being hard and the work being worth doing. This work, he had decided, was worth doing, even if it was already too late. He wasn't certain yet which of those was true. The county, meanwhile, had opinions. The county always had opinions. It was, William reflected, perhaps the primary occupation of the landed gentry, the cultivation and distribution of opinions about the private of other landed gentry, conducted under a thin veneer of social concern that fooled no one but was maintained by everyone regardless. He became aware of it first through Lord Ashford, who appeared at the manor on a Tuesday morning with the slightly too casual energy of a man delivering a message he has been elected to deliver, and is not entirely comfortable with. They sat in the receiving room with tea, and Ashford talked about the harvest and the roads and a dispute over water rights on the far edge of the county, And then he paused and looked into his cup and said, "There's talk, William. There's always talk, specific talk." A pause. About the Whitmore girl. About the evening of the ball. About the situation generally. He looked up. "I thought you ought to know as a friend that the conversation has been happening." "What is the conversation saying?" Ashford shifted in his chair. "The prevailing view is that you're in a difficult position, that you conducted yourself imprudently at the ball, that Abigail handled it with extraordinary dignity." That he stopped. "Say it. That people are watching to see what comes next." Ashford met his eyes. "The sympathy, William, is with your wife. Comprehensively. I say this not to wound you, but because I think you should know the temperature of things." William was quiet for a moment. "The sympathy is well placed," he said. Ashford stared at him. "She has been this estate," William continued, and his voice was level and clear. "She has managed everything on this land that matters for 9 years while I attended to things I considered more important, and were not. The sympathy being with her is accurate." A long silence. "I see," Ashford said finally. Then with more warmth, "How is she?" "She is herself. More so than she has been in some time, I think." He paused. "She sat on the floor of the Pierce cottage last week and cried with a 14-year-old girl who's been accepted to school in Maidstone." Ashford blinked. "What?" "It's a long story. The short version is that Abigail has been trying to get that girl educated for 2 years, and I had, through bureaucratic inattention, been preventing it without knowing." He picked up his tea. "I know now." Ashford was quiet for a moment. "You've changed," he said. Not as a compliment or a condemnation, simply as an observation. "I'm trying to. Does she believe you?" William set down his cup. "She's watching." "Yes," William agreed. "It is." After Ashford left, William sat alone in the receiving room for a while. The county's sympathy was with Abigail. Of course it was. Anyone who had been paying attention, and apparently everyone had been paying more attention than he had, would have arrived at the same conclusion. He found himself hoping, with a quiet ferocity, that she knew it. She knew. She knew because Margaret Ashford came to call 3 days after her husband's visit, and Margaret was not a woman who conducted conversations in the oblique, hedging way of the county's more cautious members. She arrived at 11 o'clock, was shown into the morning room, declined tea with the air of someone who has come on business, and said directly, "I want to know how you actually are." Not the correct answer. The true one. Abigail looked at her oldest friend. They had known each other since girlhood. Since before Abigail was Abigail Harrington, when she was Abigail Mercer and the world had felt, briefly, like something that might arrange itself kindly. Margaret was one of the few people who had watched the full arc of her marriage with clear eyes and kept her own counsel about what she saw, because she was wise enough to know that unsolicited truth about someone's marriage is rarely received well by the person living it. But she was here now, and she was asking directly, and Abigail felt something release in her chest, the particular release of being seen by someone who has known you long enough to ask the right question. "I am clearer than I have been in years," Abigail said carefully. "Is that good or frightening?" "Both." A pause. "Mostly good." "And William?" Abigail considered. "He went to the Henley cottage last week and spent an hour listening to Martha Henley describe everything that has been wrong with the tenancy management for the past 3 years. Margaret's eyebrows rose. "He moved the craftsman for the roof up by 2 days because he was worried about the weather." She looked at her hands. "He found out about Sarah Pierce and wrote to the school in Maidstone himself." Without being asked. "Yes." A breath. "He is trying, Margaret. Genuinely. The trying looks different from how I imagined it would look, on those rare occasions when I imagined it at all. It's not grand, it's not sweeping, it's he shows up. He listens. And doesn't wait to be thanked for it." She paused. "It's exactly what I needed him to do 9 years ago, and I don't know what to do with the fact that he's doing it now." Margaret was quiet. "Are you going to stay?" she asked. The question sat in the room. Abigail looked at the window. Outside, she knew without looking. The estate spread out in its late November gray, the fields, the cottages, the gardens she had designed, the people she had spent 9 years loving, while her husband attended to other things. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Does he know that?" "He knows I'm watching." She turned back to her friend. "He knows I'm not forgiven. I told him directly, and he accepted that?" He said he was learning to understand the difference between regret and change. A pause. "Which is either the wisest thing he's said in 9 years or a very sophisticated form of the same comfortable assumption he's always made, that I will be here, waiting, and that waiting is something I am still willing to do." Margaret reached across and took her hand. "What do you want?" "Not what is sensible. not what the county expects, not what a woman of her position ought to want. What do you want? Abigail held her friend's hand and felt the full weight of a question she had not permitted herself to ask for a very long time. I want to be wanted, she said, and her voice was very quiet. Not needed, not convenient. She paused. I want someone to choose me, not because I am manageable or useful or present, because they would choose me, even if I were none of those things. The room was very still as he said, he hasn't said anything like that. He's been careful, honest about what he's done wrong, present in ways he wasn't before, but he hasn't said that. She withdrew her hand gently. Perhaps he never will. Perhaps he doesn't feel it. And if that's the case, then all of this, the trying, the listening, the Henley roof and Sarah Pierce, it is good. And it is right. And it is what he should have been doing always. But it is not the same as loving someone in the way they need to be loved. Margaret nodded slowly. What continue? Abigail said. As I told Lady Gresham, continue being myself in my own life and see what that reveals. What it revealed came on a Thursday evening, and it arrived without warning in the way that the most significant things always do, not with fanfare, but with a single, ordinary moment that turns out to be the pivot point of everything. William came home from Maidstone. He had gone in the morning to deal with a legal matter regarding the estate's boundary, a routine thing, the kind of administrative business that had always constituted, in his mind, the real work of his life. He arrived back at the manor as the sun was going down and found the house quieter than usual. Mrs. Hartwell met him in the entrance hall. Lady Abigail is in the garden, she said, and something in her voice made him look at her more carefully. What happened? She had a letter this afternoon, Mrs. Hartwell's expression was composed in the precise way it became composed when she was holding something difficult behind it. From her brother in London. William was already moving. He found Abigail at the far end of the garden, standing near the stone wall where the last of the autumn roses had given up entirely. She had a letter in one hand, and she was not reading it, she was simply holding it, staring at nothing with an expression that she had not managed into its usual composure. Abigail, she turned. Her eyes were dry, but the skin around them was tight, in a way that told him they had not been dry recently. My mother is unwell, she said. He crossed the remaining distance between them. How unwell? The physician says weeks, perhaps a month. She's been a breath. She has been declining since the spring, and Robert says she hasn't wanted me to know because she didn't want to worry me. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. She was protecting me. My mother, who is dying, was protecting me from the worry of it. He reached out and took the letter from her hand, not to read it, just to free her hands, and she let him, and that small act of letting him, he understood, was not nothing. I need to go to London, she said. I'll arrange the carriage tonight. You can leave at first light. She looked at him. You don't need to. I want to come with you. The words came out simply, without deliberation, because they were simply, without deliberation, true. If you'll allow it. I won't be in the way. But I'd like to be there. She was very still. Why? He held her gaze. Because your mother is dying, he said. And because you shouldn't face that alone. And because he paused, and what came next came from somewhere he hadn't fully accessed before, something real and unpolished, and not at all the kind of language he usually employed. Because I have let you face too many things alone, and I don't want this to be another one of them. Abigail looked at him for a long time. The wind moved through the dead roses. Then she said, all right, just that, all right. But it was different from the last time she'd said those words. There was something in it barely there. Like the first green the Pierce girl would one day learn to name in Latin, that was not simply acceptance. It was permission. They left at dawn. The road to London was 4 hours in good conditions. And the conditions were not good. The November roads were rutted, and the sky was the color of pewter, and the carriage rocked with a persistence that made long silences feel even longer. They did not maintain long silences. It started practically the arrangements for the household in their absence. Look, the meshes that needed sending. The matters that Mrs. Hartwell would need authority to manage. But practical conversation has a way, when the two people having it have been through what they had been through, of sliding towards something more honest without either person quite choosing it. Tell me about her, William said when the practical things were exhausted. Your mother. Abigail looked at him. What do you want to know? Whatever you'd like to tell me. He held her gaze across the swaying carriage. I realize I know almost nothing about her, beyond her name and the fact that she lives in London with your brother. A pause. That is an inexcusable gap, and I am aware of it. Something moved across Abigail's face. Then slowly she began to talk. She talked about her mother the way you talk about someone you love, when you have been holding the love quietly inside you for a long time, and have been given, unexpectedly, a vessel for it. Her mother had been a schoolteacher before her marriage, unusual for a woman of her generation, and a source of considerable quiet pride. She had taught Abigail to read at 4 years old. She had given her books instead of dolls, and argued gently but persistently that a woman's mind was not an ornament. She would have liked Sarah Pierce, Abigail said. She would have liked her enormously. "Tell me more," William said. And Abigail did. For an hour she talked, and William listened, truly listened, with his full attention and no part of his mind elsewhere, and he heard, woven through everything she said about her mother, the shape of everything Abigail had been shaped by. The woman who had been given books instead of dolls. The woman who had been told that her mind mattered. The woman who had married into a life where the person beside her had gradually and without malice stopped treating her mind as though it mattered at all. When she finally stopped, she looked out the window at the gray countryside moving past. "I haven't talked about her in years," she said. "I don't know why." "Because I didn't ask." His voice was quiet. "I should have asked." "Yes," she agreed. "You should have." They sat in the rocking carriage, and something passed between them, not forgiveness. Not yet, but its necessary precursor. The recognition, fully mutual and fully honest, of what had been lost and what it had cost. The carriage rolled on, and then William said something that he had not planned to say, that arrived without calculation or strategy, that came from whatever part of him had been slowly, painfully, learning to be honest. "I chose you," he said. She turned from the window. "When we married," he continued, "I chose you, because you were the most quietly extraordinary person I had ever met. I saw it then. I did see it, Abigail, in the beginning. And somewhere in the comfort and the routine and the terrible ease of taking a capable person for granted, He stopped. "I stopped choosing you. Every day, every morning I stopped making the choice. I let the marriage exist, rather than deciding to live in it." Her eyes were very bright. "I am not saying this to ask for anything," he said carefully. "I am not saying it because I think it changes what I've done, or earns me something I haven't earned. I'm saying it because you said something to Margaret Ashford. She told you. She wrote to me. Yesterday morning, before I left for Maidstone." He held her gaze. "She told me what you said, about wanting to be chosen. Not needed, not useful, chosen." The carriage hit a rut and swayed and steadied. "I am choosing you," he said. "I understand that I have to earn the right to have that mean anything. I understand that 9 years of not choosing is not erased by one morning in a carriage. But I want you to hear it said directly, without qualifications, without." He exhaled. "I am choosing you, Abigail. Not the household, not the estate, not the comfortable shape of a marriage that runs without effort. You, the woman who sat on the floor of a cottage with a 14-year-old girl. The woman who wrote 14 letters she never sent. The woman who built everything I thought I owned. A beat. You." The silence that followed was the longest of his life. Abigail sat across from him in the rocking carriage, with the gray November countryside moving past the window, and she looked at him with those clear eyes that saw things precisely as they were, that had always seen things precisely as they were. That was in fact the thing about her that had most profoundly shaped every life she touched, and most profoundly been ignored by the one person who should have treasured it. And then she said, "That is the first time in 9 years that you have said something to me that I did not already know you were going to say." He waited. "I don't know what to do with it yet," she continued. I need time, and right now I need to see my mother." Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and she let it break, which was new, which was her not managing herself for his comfort. "But I heard you. I want you to know that I heard you." "That's enough," he said. "Is it for now?" he said. "For today it is." She nodded once, and they rode the rest of the way to London in a silence that was not the old silence, not the silence of two people who have nothing to say to each other. It was the silence of two people carrying something enormous and fragile between them, afraid to move too quickly, understanding that fragile things require that particular kind of care. Eleanor Mercer was smaller than William had imagined. He had constructed, from the fragments Abigail had given him, a figure of some considerable presence, a woman with a teacher's bearing and a schoolteacher's directness. What he found, in the upstairs bedroom of the Mercer townhouse in Holborn, was a woman who had been diminished by illness into something frail and quiet, but whose eyes, dark and sharp and startlingly like her daughter's, missed absolutely nothing. She looked at William when he came into the room behind Abigail, and her expression did something complicated and swift that he could not fully read. Then she held out her hand to her daughter. Abigail crossed the room and took it, and sat on the edge of the bed, and the two women looked at each other in the way that mothers and daughters look at each other when the time between them has grown short, and every look carries the weight of all the ones that won't be possible later. "You look well," Eleanor said. Her voice was thin, but her diction was precise. "I look tired from the road," Abigail said. "Don't flatter me, Mama." Something in Eleanor's face shifted into what was clearly a habitual expression, a dry, fond humor that William recognized immediately, because he had seen its echo in Abigail's face in moments she didn't know he was watching. "You brought him," Eleanor said. "He asked to come." Eleanor looked at William properly. "Lord Harrington. Not cold. Not warm." Measuring Mrs. Mercer. He came forward and took a chair near the bed because standing in doorways was a habit he was trying to break. "I'm glad to meet you. Abigail has been telling me about you on the journey." "Has she?" She glanced at her daughter. "Good things, I hope." "Extraordinary things," he said. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, the measuring look of a woman who has spent her life in proximity to young minds and has become, through that proximity, extremely accurate in her assessments. "You are either a man who has recently learned something difficult," she said, "or a man who is very good at performing that he has." Mama Abigail began. "I believe it is the former," William said. "I understand why you would want to verify that." Eleanor looked at him a moment longer. Then she looked at her daughter. "He has good eyes," she said, "when he's actually using them." A pause. Then Abigail laughed that same laugh he had heard for the first time in years, just days ago, and that he understood now was something to be protected as carefully as anything on this estate. "He's learning," she said. "Good." Eleanor settled back against her pillows. "It is never too late to learn things. I taught school for 20 years, and that is the single truth I will carry with me out of this world." She closed her eyes briefly, and the illness showed more clearly in that moment, the exhaustion of a body that has been fighting for a long time. "I just wish he had started sooner." "So do I," William said. Eleanor opened her eyes, and something passed between them, not forgiveness exactly, but its first cousin, acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a woman who has spent her life seeing clearly, looking at a man who is finally doing the same. "Stay," she said. "Both of you. Robert has made up the guest rooms, and I would like to have my daughter in the house." She paused. "And I would like to know my son-in-law." William looked at Abigail. She was looking at her mother, and her face was open in a way he had only begun to see recently, unmanaged, unguarded, wholly present. "We'll stay," she said. They stayed for 12 days. And in those 12 days, sitting in the small parlor of the Mercer townhouse, while Eleanor rested, or walking the gray London streets in the thin December light, or sharing meals with Abigail's brother Robert, who watched William with the careful eyes of a man assessing whether some deserves his sister, William learned more about his wife than he had learned in 9 years of living beside her. He learned that she had wanted to be a physician when she was 12, and had been told firmly that this was not a suitable ambition. He learned that she had read every book her mother owned twice before she was 14. He learned that she had been in love, briefly and inconveniently, with a young man who had gone to sea and never come back, and that she had been 23 when she married William, and had brought to that marriage not the desperate hope of a woman with no other options, but the careful, reasoned choice of a woman who had decided to try. He learned that she had tried. For 9 years, she had tried, and he had not noticed, and she had kept trying anyway, and eventually she had stopped, and she had been right to stop. He learned all of this not in one conversation, but in the accumulation of many small ones at breakfast with Eleanor, during walks, in the evenings when the house was quiet, and Abigail sat with her mother and held her hand, and talked about things that mattered, and let William be in the room while she did it. That he understood was a gift, letting him be in the room. He did not waste it. On the 9th day, Eleanor called him in alone. Abigail was resting. She had barely slept in a week, keeping close to her mother, and William had finally persuaded her to lie down for an hour. He sat in the chair beside Eleanor's bed, and she looked at him with those precise, exhausted eyes. "I want to ask you something directly," she said. "Please. Do you love my daughter?" The questions was simple and enormous simultaneously. He had not said the word to Abigail. He had said, "I am choosing you." He had said, "you." He had not said the 4 letters that meant all of it. because he had not been sure whether he had earned the right to say them yet, and because Abigail had asked for actions and not words, and because he was genuinely trying to give her what she had asked for rather than what was easy. "Yes," he said. "Did you love her before all of this?" "I believe I did," he said carefully. "I believe I loved her the way a man loves something he has stopped being afraid of losing, which is not, I understand now, the same as loving someone the way they deserve to be loved." Eleanor was quiet. "She deserves to be loved the way she loves," she said. Completely, practically, with full attention and full presence. A pause. "She has been loving people that way her entire life. She loved those workers of yours that way. She loved Sarah Pierce that way. She loved me that way, I know, and you left her with nothing to receive it." The words were not cruel. They were simply accurate, delivered by a woman who was running out of time for anything less than accuracy. "Yes," he said, "I did." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "Fix it," she said. "Not for me, not for the county or the estate or what is correct. Fix it because she is worth fixing it for. And because if you don't," she stopped. "She will leave, William, not with anger, not with drama. She will simply, quietly choose herself, and she should. And you will spend the rest of your life understanding exactly what you lost." He thought of Abigail in the ballroom. The smile. "Because I finally see you clearly." "I know," he said. "Then go be with her," Eleanor said. "Stop sitting here with a dying old woman and go be with my daughter." He stood. He paused at the door. "Mrs. Mercer, for what it's worth, she told me you gave her books instead of dolls." Eleanor's eyes were closing with exhaustion, but something in her face lifted. "Best decision I ever made," she murmured. "Yes," William said. It was. He went to find Abigail. She was not resting. She was sitting at the small desk in the guest room, writing one of her letters. He thought, at first, the unsent kind, the words that had nowhere to go. But she looked up when he came in, and the letter was not to him. It was to Sarah Pierce. "I wanted to tell her what my mother told me when I was her age," Abigail said simply, as though she had been expecting him, "about what it means to have a mind that works." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the chair beside her. "What did she tell you?" Abigail looked down at the letter. Then she looked at him. "She told me that a woman's mind is not an ornament," she said. "She told me that the world will try very hard to convince you otherwise. She told me to do the work anyway, to think anyway, to build anyway." A breath. "She told me that the things you build quietly, without recognition, those things are real. They last. And someday someone will look at what you have built and understand." The words settled over both of them. William looked at his wife. He looked at her the way she had looked at him in the ballroom, with the full, clear, unobstructed sight of someone who has finally cleaned the window. "Finish the letter," he said. "And then will you come sit with me?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said, "just yes." Without qualification, without the careful management of a woman deciding how much to give. Just yes. And William Harrington sat in a small chair beside his wife in a London townhouse, and listened to the scratch of her pen, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could account for, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because the estate required it, not because it was convenient, because he had chosen it, because he had finally and irrevocably chosen her. Eleanor Mercer died on a Tuesday morning, 12 days after they arrived in London, with Abigail's hand in hers, and the winter light coming through the curtains, and everything that needed to be said already said. She went quietly. That was the word Robert used when he came into the corridor afterward, and it was the right word, not peaceful exactly, because there is nothing peaceful about losing your mother, but quiet in the way that things become quiet when they have been completed, when every word has been given its proper place. Abigail did not fall apart. William had half expected her to, or perhaps had half hoped she would, because he would have known how to respond to that, would have had something practical and useful to do. But she sat beside her mother's bed for a long time after, holding the hand that was no longer holding hers back, and her face was still and open and wholly present in her grief in a way that was distinctly, recognizably Abigail feeling things fully, without performance, without management, without reducing herself for anyone else's comfort. William stood in the doorway. He did not go in. He did not speak. He simply stood where she could see him if she looked, and he stayed there, and he let her have her grief without requiring anything of it. After a while, she looked up. She looked at him across the room, across the bed, across the body of her mother, across the 12 days they had spent rebuilding something in this small London house, and her eyes were wet but her gaze was steady. "Thank you," she said, "for being here." 3 words. Simple and direct. the way she was when she had stopped managing herself. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She nodded once. Then she looked back at her mother's face, and William stayed in the doorway, and the morning moved around them both. They buried Eleanor Mercer on a Friday. The service was small family, and a handful of her former students, now grown, who had traveled to pay their respects to the woman who had taught them to read and think, and believe that their minds were worth something. Several of them were women. Several of them had done remarkable things. One of them a physician's wife who had, improbably and tenaciously, established a school for girls in Derbyshire, stood at the graveside, and wept without embarrassment, and afterward pressed Abigail's hand and said simply, "She made me possible." Abigail held herself together through the service, and the burial, and the gathering afterward at the Mercer townhouse, where Robert's wife organized tea and sandwiches with the efficient kindness of a woman who understands that grief requires practical management. It was only later, when the guests had gone, and Robert and his wife had retired, and the house was quiet, that Abigail sat down at her mother's writing desk and put her face in her hands. William was there. He had been watching for it, the moment when the composure that she had held so carefully all day would find its limit. Not because he wanted her to break, but because he understood now what it cost her to hold things in, and he wanted to be present when the holding stopped. He crossed the room and sat beside her and did not say anything. She cried, not elegantly, not quietly, the kind of crying that has been compressed for 12 days of practical necessity and is now finally permitted to take up its proper space, loud and full and entirely without apology. He put his arm around her. She did not pull away. She leaned into him tentatively at first, then fully. The way you lean into something when you have tested its strength and found it solid. And she cried for her mother and for all the visits she hadn't made, and all the letters she had written but not sent, and all the years she had been quietly carrying everything alone while he had not been paying attention. He held her and said nothing and let it be exactly what it was. After a long time, her breathing steadied. She did not move away from him immediately. They sat together in the quiet of her mother's study, and the fire burned low, and the house was still around them. "She told me something," Abigail said finally, her voice rough, "before she died. She told me that the bravest thing a woman can do is decide what she actually wants and then let herself want it without apology." He was very still. "She told me to stop being patient," she continued. "She said patience is a virtue until it becomes a habit of self-erasure, and then it is simply a way of disappearing slowly. A breath. She said she had watched me disappearing for years, and she had not said anything because she believed it was my marriage and my choice. But she said she was not going to die with that left unsaid." "What did you tell her?" Abigail lifted her head. She looked at him close, directly, with the full force of those clear eyes. "I told her I had already stopped." The words sat between them. "I told her that something had shifted, that I was not the same woman I had been at the ball." She paused. "I told her about sitting on the floor with Sarah Pierce. I told her about the morning room, and the letters and the walk to the Morrison cottage." Her voice was steadier now, building on something. "I told her about a man in a carriage who said he was choosing me." His breath caught. "She told me to make him prove it." A silence, and he said. Abigail looked at him. "You're here," she said. "In London, at my mother's desk, with your arm around me at 11 o'clock on a Friday night when there is nothing here that requires your presence except that I needed someone beside me." A breath. "That is a kind of proof." He held her gaze. "It's a beginning," he said. "Not the whole of it." "No," she agreed, "not the whole of it." But she did not move away from him, and the fire burned lower, and the house was quiet, and Eleanor Mercer's books were arranged along the wall in their precise rows, and her daughter sat in her study and let herself be held by her husband, for the first time in 9 years, without calculating what it cost her. They returned to Harrington Manor on a gray December morning, and the estate received them the way it always did, solidly, without ceremony, the stone face of the house unchanged by anything that had happened inside or outside it. But inside was different. The household felt it before anyone said a word about it. Mrs. Hartwell, greeting them in the entrance hall, took one look at both of their faces and understood something that would have taken anyone else several conversations to communicate. She took Abigail's hands briefly, pressed them, and said only, "I'm very sorry, my lady." She was a remarkable woman. She was, Abigail said. She would have liked you enormously. The feeling would have been mutual, I think. It was the most Mrs. Hartwell had ever said about herself in William's presence. He noticed and said nothing. and stored it away in the accumulation of things he was learning. The estate had not dissolved in their absence. Of course it hadn't, Mrs. Hartwell had managed it with the same calm competence she brought to everything, but she had done so now with a list of standing authorizations from William that meant she had not been required to navigate around bureaucratic obstacles for 12 days. Things had been addressed. The Henley roof was finished. Dr. Calloway had returned to the Pierce boy twice and declared him fully recovered. The Griffin fence was mended. The estate was running, but differently than it had run before, not because everything had changed, but because the person who had always been running it was now, for the first time, visible. William made sure of that. He gathered the estate manager, a cautious man named Fellows, who had, William now understood, been functioning as a buffer between the family and the tenants, in ways that had served no one well, and he sat down with him and revised every standing instruction. He did it with Abigail present. He asked for her corrections, her additions, her knowledge of situations Fellows had never mentioned because they had been handled quietly by Lady Harrington before they required escalation. Fellows spent the first 20 minutes of that meeting looking profoundly uncomfortable. By the end, he looked something more like relieved. "I should have raised these matters with you directly, my lord," he said, at one point, about the Henley situation. "You should have," William agreed. "But I should also have made it clear that I wanted to know. I gave you the impression, through inaction, that I preferred not to be troubled with tenant matters. That was wrong of me." Fellows stared at him. "My lord, I am not asking for absolution, Fellows. I'm stating a fact so that we're operating from the same understanding going forward." A pause. "The families on this estate are not administrative problems. They are people. I intend to know them. I intend for their concerns to reach me directly, without being filtered or delayed. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, my lord." After Fellows left, Abigail sat across from William in the study, his study, which she had entered perhaps a dozen times in 9 years, and looked at him with an expression he was learning to read, not quite approval, but its honest predecessor, recognition. "That was well done," she said. "It needed saying." "It did. He'll manage better now. He's not a bad man. He simply inherited a system that rewarded invisibility. Like everyone else in this household." She looked at him steadily. "Yes, that system is gone," he said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever I was, before whatever I permitted by inattention, that's not what this estate is anymore." She held his gaze for a moment. "Actions," she said quietly, "not intentions. I'm watching, William. I want you to know that, not with suspicion, but I am watching." "I want you to," he said. "I need someone to. I've operated without scrutiny for too long, and I've seen what that produces." Something shifted in her face, a fractional softening, almost imperceptible, the kind that is more significant than any dramatic expression because it costs more. "All right," she said, and stood. "Then I'm going to the Morrison cottage. Mary's birthday is in 3 days, and I promised her something." "What did you promise her?" "That I would teach her to bake apple cake." She paused in the doorway. "Her mother has agreed. I have very little confidence in my baking, if I'm honest. May I come?" She turned to look at him. "You want to come and watch me make a terrible apple cake with a 4-year-old? "I want to come," he said simply, a beat. Then the corner of her mouth moved. "Get your coat," she said. "And don't tell her what you think of the cake, whatever it tastes like. She'll remember it for years." The apple cake was, by any objective measure, a catastrophe. Mary Morrison had strong opinions about the quantity of sugar required, and a complete disregard for the concept of measurement. And the result was something dense and slightly lopsided that Mary herself declared to be the best thing she had ever seen. She presented William with the first slice. He ate it entirely and told her it was exceptional. Mary nodded with profound satisfaction. "I knew it," she said. "I put extra sugar, I could tell. That's the secret." She leaned toward him with the gravity of someone sharing classified information. "Always extra sugar. I'll remember that." Mrs. Morrison, across the kitchen, caught Abigail's eye over her daughter's head. Something passed between them, a look so complete and so quickly exchanged that it required no words at all. On the walk home, the December air sharp and the afternoon light already fading, William said, "She is extraordinary." "Mary?" "Yes, she has your quality," he said, "of seeing people directly and not being frightened of what she sees." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "That's the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time," she said. "That she resembles me in something. It's true." "I know." She looked straight ahead. "That's what makes it kind." They walked in comfortable silence, a silence that was, he realized, entirely different from the silences of before. Not the silence of two people with nothing to say. Not the silence of a woman who has stopped expecting to be heard. The silence of two people who have said enough, for now, and are simply walking together in the same direction. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. The twist came on Christmas Eve. William had not expected it. He had been operating for 6 weeks, on the understanding that rebuilding was slow work, and that he had no right to expect dramatic resolution from a situation that had taken 9 years to break. He had been patient with a patience that was foreign to him and costly, and he had tried to mean it, rather than perform it, and most days he believed he was succeeding. Christmas Eve at Harrington Manor had always been, in Abigail's management of the household, a significant occasion. The tenant families were invited to the manor grounds for the afternoon. There was food from the kitchen and a fire outdoors, and the children were given small gifts that Abigail had spent October quietly assembling. William had attended these gatherings before standing at the edges of them, nodding appropriately, fulfilling his role as lord of the manor, with the comfortable distance of a man who considers such things well-managed obligations. This year he did not stand at the edges. He moved through the crowd of families with a purposefulness that surprised everyone, himself included. He knew names now. He had spent 6 weeks learning names, and he used them. He crouched down to speak with children. He shook Thomas Morrison's hand and asked specifically about the fence repair. He found Ellen Pierce and asked about James. And Ellen looked at him with those measuring eyes and seemed, for the first time, to find the measurement satisfactory. He found Sarah Pierce near the fire, with a book in her hand, reading despite everything happening around her. "What are you reading?" She looked up. "Wollstonecraft." He blinked. "Lady Harrington lent it to me," she said, with the total composure of a 14-year-old who has not yet learned to be self-conscious about her own intelligence. "She said her mother gave it to her when she was my age." He stood there for a moment, holding that. "It's very good," he said finally. "It's very angry," she said, "but in a way that seems correct." "Yes," he said, "I think that's fair." He found Abigail 20 minutes later, surrounded by children, Mary Morrison on one hip, 2 of the Henley children orbiting her like small, enthusiastic planets. She was laughing at something one of them had said, and her face was open and bright and unguarded in the way it only was when she had entirely forgotten to manage herself. He stopped. He stood at the edge of the circle, and he looked at her, at this woman, his wife, who had built this entire world of warmth and connection and care around a house he owned and had never truly inhabited, and he felt something so complete and so clarifying that it left no room for anything else. He loved her, not the comfortable, unexamined love of a man who has stopped choosing, not the abstract marital affection of a man who considers himself a decent husband because he has never been cruel. He loved her the way she deserved to be loved, with his full attention and his complete understanding of exactly who she was, and what she had built, and what she had borne, and what it had cost her. He loved her with the love of a man who has been made, through loss and reckoning, and the quiet, relentless revelation of another person's worth, into someone capable of it. Mary Morrison looked up from Abigail's shoulder and spotted him. "Lord Harrington." She pointed at him with a hand still sticky from apple cake residue. "Come here." Abigail turned. She looked at him across the gathering, across the families, the firelight, the Christmas Eve that she had built for this community for 9 years, while he had stood at the edges. He walked toward her. He walked through the crowd of people whose names he now knew, past the children whose futures he was finally paying attention to, past the fire that his wife had arranged, and the food his wife had organized, and the warmth that had always been hers. And he stopped in front of her. Mary was already reaching for him with both arms, the absolute confidence of a child who has decided you are trustworthy and sees no reason to revise. He took her automatically, which made her crow with delight, and she immediately began telling him something about a rabbit. He listened to exactly none of it. He was looking at Abigail. She was looking back at him with those clear eyes, and whatever she saw in his face made something happen in hers, that small, seismic shift he had been watching for, the one that was not forgiveness and not resolution, but something more alive than either, something that could grow. "William," she said quietly, under the noise of the gathering. "Abigail." "You're not at the edges," she said. "No, you haven't been for 6 weeks. "No," he said. "I haven't." She looked at him for a long moment. Mary was still talking about the rabbit. The fire crackled. Someone laughed loudly nearby. The whole warm, complicated living world of Harrington Manor moved around them. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer me honestly. Not with what you think I need to hear. What is actually true. Ask, do you love me?" The question was direct and clean and entirely without the careful hedging of a woman who has learned to protect herself from answers that hurt. She asked it the way her mother had taught her to do everything straight on, without flinching, because the truth is always better than the comfortable management of not knowing it. He looked at her. He did not calculate the answer. He did not weigh it, or consider its implications, or decide what it was appropriate to say in front of the assembled tenants of Harrington Manor on Christmas Eve. "Yes," he said, "I have loved you badly, and I have loved you blindly, and I have loved you in ways that were more about my comfort than your worth. But yes, I love you. I think I have loved you from the beginning, and I spent 9 years treating that love like a thing I owned rather than a thing I was responsible for." He paused. "I don't intend to make that mistake again." Mary Morrison had gone quiet on his arm, sensing with the animal precision of small children that something important was happening. Abigail looked at him. The fire, the families, the estate she had built, the man she had married who had finally, irreversibly arrived. "I believe you," 3 words. Simple and enormous. The 3 words that a woman speaks when she has been truthful enough to know the difference between performance and reality, and has decided that what she is seeing is real. "What does that mean?" he asked carefully. "It means I believe you," she said. "It means I am not ready to say that everything is repaired, because it isn't. It means I know the difference between 6 weeks and 9 years. But it means," she stopped, breathed, "it means I am willing to keep building this. With you. If you keep showing up the way you have been showing up." "I will," she said. "That's why I believe you." Mary chose this moment to declare loudly that she wanted to see the rabbits, and the gravity of the moment fractured beautifully into the ordinary, living chaos of a family gathering on a December evening. And Abigail laughed and took Mary back, and William stood beside her, and the world continued around them. The letter from the Maidstone School arrived in January. Sarah Pierce was to begin in February. The headmistress had written to Abigail directly, not to William, not to the estate manager, not through any of the channels that had previously required his prior approval. To Abigail, addressing her by name, thanking her for her years of advocacy, expressing genuine eagerness to receive a student of such evident promise. Abigail read it at the breakfast table. Then she handed it across to William. He read it, set it down, looked at her. "She wrote to you," he said. "She did, not to the estate, not to you." "To me," Abigail agreed. And there was something in her voice, quiet and certain, and entirely undefended, that was the sound of a woman who has been seen by the right people for long enough that she has stopped being surprised by it and started simply accepting it as her due, which was exactly what it was. He reached across the table. He placed his hand over hers, not dramatically, not with the weight of a gesture that wants to be noticed, but simply, directly, the way you reach for something that belongs beside you. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that at the breakfast table of Harrington Manor in the January light, with the estate running around them and the families tended, and Sarah Pierce going to school, and Mary Morrison's rabbits still safe in the south field, and 14 unsent letters long since replaced by conversations that actually happened. And neither of them spoke for a while. Because there are silences that are the absence of connection, and there are silences that are its most complete expression. And this was the latter, the silence of 2 people who have fought their way through to the same place and are, for the first time, simply present in it together. Abigail had not left Harrington Manor. Not because she had nowhere to go. Not because the social mathematics of Lady Gresham's careful warnings had constrained her. Not because she had surrendered her own judgment to the comfortable fiction that staying was easier than choosing. She had stayed because she had made a choice. The same kind of clear, deliberate, eyes-open choice that her mother had taught her to make straight on, without flinching, because the truth is always better than the comfortable management of not knowing it. She had chosen to stay because the man across the table from her had chosen her back. Not perfectly, not without the weight of 9 years between them, but truly, and practically, and daily, and with the full, for present attention of a man who understood at last what he had nearly lost and was not willing to take it for granted ever again. That was the truth at the center of everything. Not the ballroom, not the smile, Not the 7 words that had stopped him cold in front of 200 people. Those were the beginning. This the January light, the letter from Maidstone, the hand held across a breakfast table. This was what the beginning had been for. William Harrington had walked into a ballroom with another woman on his arm, and every soul in the room had waited for his wife to break. But Abigail Mercer had not broken. She had smiled that clear, free, devastatingly final smile, and she had said 7 words that were not a weapon and not a wound, but simply the truth, spoken by a woman who had finally, after 9 years, decided that the truth was worth speaking. Because I finally see you clearly. And in seeing him clearly, she had done the thing that changed everything. She had allowed herself to be seen, not managed, not reduced, not invisible, seen fully, honestly, with all the complexity and strength and quiet, extraordinary worth that she had spent 9 years pouring into a home and a community, and a life that had always been more hers than anyone had acknowledged. And the man who had once walked past her as though she were a stranger had walked toward her, in the end, and kept walking. That was not a small thing. That was in fact everything. The woman who had stopped waiting had not stopped loving. She had simply decided that love, to be worth anything, had to flow both ways, seen and returned and chosen, every day, without comfort making anyone careless. And on a January morning in 1818, with her hand in her husband's and the winter light coming through the windows of the home she had built, Abigail Harrington understood something her mother had known all along. The bravest thing a woman can do is decide what she actually wants. And then, without apology, without waiting for permission, without making herself smaller to fit inside someone else's inattention, want it.